Better Buildings for Humans is powered by Advanced Glazings, makers of the Solera line of products. Solera is the leading glass glazing made specifically for architectural daylighting and with extreme insulation performance. Learn more at advancedglazings.com. Hello and welcome to this week's episode of Better Buildings for Humans. I'm your host, Joe Menchefski, and this is the podcast where we take a look at the impact that the built environment has on our health, our wellness, our productivity, and our general joy of being alive. And of course, we have to talk about sustainable design as well. And today is my big day that I've been waiting for weeks and weeks. I have Yiselle Santos Rivera, the incoming president. And by the time this goes live, she will be the president of the AIA. Yiselle, thank you so much for agreeing to be here and welcome.
Thank you very much. I'm incredibly excited to be here.
Yeah,
It's an honor.
It's an honor for me, for sure. Let's start with a huge congratulations in your new role as president. And I know by the time this goes live, that will be official. Let's learn a little bit about you. Tell us, first of all, why you chose architecture as a career.
Well, that's a wonderful question. It's a very long question, so I'll try to keep it a little concise because, of course, it's an incredible passion of mine. So my path to architecture was, I guess, perceivably incredibly obvious, but also very unexpected. I grew up in Puerto Rico, and I grew up building little villages out of sofa cushions for my brother, who I'm still obsessed with. He's a mechanical engineer and he's fantastic. But I loved building full cities with streets and stories and places to hide all around the house. So my parents imagined and told me that they knew that I was going to be an architect. I didn't think I would because I was taken to a firm. And the first thing they did was they showed me a lot of models. And I thought, I kind of do this already as a child, doing this with my brother. And it didn't necessarily pique my interest. It seemed very narrow. So I didn't see the path that way while I was graduating. I actually started in genetics when I was in my undergraduate studies. I was fascinated. I still am very fascinated by science. And I imagined myself being more of a lab coat, solving mysteries about the human body, which in part is one of the reasons that I am doing my doctorates in psychology for neuroscience and organizational design. But what I really understood and what really got to me was that everything is about space. So I was working indoors, long hours in Puerto Rico, no windows, no daylights in these buildings, no connection to anything outside. I was just staring at the microscope. And I realized how deeply the built environment affects our bodies and our minds at the time. So at the same time that I was doing this, I was taking sculpture and metalwork because even though I love science, it wasn't fulfilling, completely fulfilling. So I started exploring how ideas become into form, and a professor of mine, a geology professor. So one of my installations, I was part of an artist subversive group when I was in Puerto Rico. And he said, "You really understand space. I think you need to go into architecture school." And I thought, okay, if he's seeing something that I continue to hear throughout my life, maybe there's something to it. And I went into architecture in Puerto Rico, at the University of Puerto Rico in Rio Piedras. And I found that architecture became the space where my love for art and science, culture, and people really intersected. It was the first time that I saw that you could shape the world literally in ways that could help people live healthier, safer, more dignified lives. So once I made the connection, I never looked back. I've been in architecture ever since.
Oh, that is a wonderful story and very common. You always hear the stories about people making things with cushions or Legos is the one that comes up a whole lot.
Oh,
Everybody
I'm
loves.
obsessed with Lego still.
Yeah, that one. It's almost universal. So tell us about the more recent road, Yiselle. Tell us about the road that led to the creation of YSR, your firm, and how you ended up in this new role with the AIA.
Of course, it's also not linear, but it very much aligns with where I hope my journey takes me. So, my career has always been built at the intersection of identity, community, and purpose. That's one of the reasons that I fell in love with architecture. So, I grew up as a healthcare designer after doing a lot of multi-purpose spaces, core and shell. But for the last 10 years, I've mostly focused on hospitals, academic medical centers, and specialty care. And I love the idea that makes such an impact that medical planning really has real human outcomes. And by most of my leadership, even though I have been in architecture for the last 20 years, has been really structured outside of the firm. I created Wield, Women Inspiring Emerging Leaders in Design through AIDC, because I didn't see spaces where women could share their stories openly. I co-created La Idea in 2013 because as a Latina, I wanted a space to celebrate our community and build community. Also, of course, I wanted to talk about architecture in Spanish and go back to my roots of having been born and raised in Puerto Rico. So these spaces became a lot of the foundation for my leadership style, which I'm learning now. It's really about storytelling, about belonging, aligning identity with design systems where people can feel seen and heard. So eventually, a lot of that work about advocacy, healthcare design, equity, and organizational psychology, for me, I guess it needed a home. And that's how YSR was born. It lets me merge architecture, neuroscience, culture, and leadership under one umbrella, which I'm starting to see in larger firms around research and all of these spaces. But I wanted to create something that was unique and really spoke about what I see in architecture and storytelling. But a lot of it now it's transforming into neuroarchitecture and trying to really understand neuroscience and how that leads into understanding spaces. And that journey into community leadership is what ultimately called me into also AIA national leadership because I believe deeply that the AIA as an organization and also as a leader in membership, leadership, and empowerment in not only the United States, but also in the world can be a place where architects grow, where they feel supported, where they feel like they can shape the profession that's ready for a new future. And I can't imagine a more critical time than now. One of the things that I'm very interested in, which I love that you mentioned, is the joy, the joy of architecture, the joy of creating spaces that build community. I've always said that for me, architecture is the backdrop of our lives, and it's one of the oldest professions. It's really rooted in shelter and safety and welfare. And in a world where a lot of things are being challenged and people are wanting to feel that there's hope. For me, and I know it's very narrow, I'm an architect, of course, I feel like this is the right time to think about healthy buildings, about healthy world, healthy people, and how that creates a healthier community. And it brings us back to the joy of being alive. So a lot of it for me, it's going to be about, for the love of architecture, bringing back the joy and why we all fell in love with architecture and how that really is rooted in health, safety, and welfare, and how we fall in love with the world, with ourselves, and how we connect with other people. And I hope that I'm able to do that through the AIA. And I'm hoping that I can bring back the joy and build a community that falls in love with architecture again.
What makes a home truly extraordinary? Not just how it looks, but how it feels. Solera Reserve transforms daylight into soft, comfortable light, privacy without blinds, beauty without compromise. By day, refined and luminous. By night, an unforgettable glow. Solera Reserve, luxury glass, designed for living. Learn more at advancedglazings.com/Solera Reserve.
Oh, that's absolutely wonderful. All right, let me ruin it by asking you some tough questions about what architects are facing these days, because it's interesting times. You alluded to it, and it's a really nice lead in
Yeah.
to what I want to talk about next. So you're stepping into this role at a really interesting time, kind of a time where architects are expected to design the world and kind of save the world too, right? I mean,
Yep.
you're being asked to address climate change, to address issues with equity and inclusion, issues with public health, while
Mhm.
simultaneously doing all the traditional roles that have to be done with architecture. How do you see the AIA's role in guiding and supporting architects to take on this broader social mission without losing touch of or losing sight of the fact that design excellence is at the core of what you do?
Thank you for that question because for me, this is the root of the reasons I fell in love with AIA as an organization that builds leaders in architecture. So for me, I truly believe that design excellence is climate action. It is equity and it is public health. These aren't separate goals. For me, they are one mission and they are rooted in the ethos of being an architect and what I think architecture could be and should be to the world. We definitely can't ignore that 50% of a person's health is tied to their zip code. We know that through the social determinants of health. We don't create zip codes, but we create the environments inside them, the schools, the clinics, the parks, the streets. And for me, the AIA must be a force that connects design excellence with social responsibility by providing tools, research, policy alignment, and certainly clear paths for firms of every size to participate. So I'm very much committed to making sure that architects don't have to choose between doing good work and staying in business. I hope that design excellence becomes recognized in architecture as people. It is about people. It is about the way that we heal, how we learn, how we connect, how we feel dignity in space. We occupy the space. So when we talk about climate equity and health, we're really talking about designing for a human experience. And we hear this constantly, but it is connected to the core of what architects do. And that's where I feel most joy. I don't know if all architects or many architects feel that way. I hope all do, but that is really rooted in how I feel about architecture. And it's also very much rooted in how I fell in love and learned about architecture in Puerto Rico. Very Latin, very rooted in community, in building community. And it's very rooted in native spaces, right? And how spaces align with organizational design of our communities and how architecture is such a manifestation of culture. So I hope that architecture and the AIA better support our members in not only being great architects, but being great facilitators, great conveners, and great leaders in the built environment.
Right on. Okay, I'm going off script a little bit, Yiselle, because I want to talk a little bit about Puerto Rico.
Sure.
I've never been, sadly. I will get there, I swear, and Canadian voice, so I need to broaden my horizons just a tad bit and get to your home. So tell me about some aspects of architecture in Puerto Rico that the world needs to know about that would be brilliant to potentially incorporate in other areas.
I love that you mentioned that. I feel incredibly privileged to have studied at the University of Puerto Rico in Rio Piedras Architecture School, which was the first architecture school. So there's a lot of history and there's a lot of culture around the University of Puerto Rico and how it's connected to the tropical climate and tropical modernism. Many of the great exponents of architecture were aligned with Frank Lloyd Wright, for example, and the international movement and modernist movement. And because we live in the tropics, we have to be incredibly aware of environmental design. So, for example, in Puerto Rico, there are various schools of architecture, but the University of Puerto Rico's undergraduate degree is environmental design, the 4 years of environmental design, and then you go to do your master's in architecture, which is the MArch that is NAB accredited to get licensed in the United States. So those 4 years, even though I did three, thankfully, because I had so many years in science, I was able to graduate early with a BS in science and then go on to do my master's at Syracuse. The reason, and I mentioned this, I didn't go into specifics. The reason I think it's visceral for me, the connection that I have with architecture, is because when I was studying genetics, the labs were designed by people from the United States that understood labs and understood the academic environment, but didn't understand the tropical environment and how much of our existence is rooted in how we feel the environment, how the sun, the wind, ventilation. And I remember being in those spaces in labs where the walls were block painted walls, all the offices for the practitioners and the investigators were in the perimeter of the building. And usually, if you know private investigators and you know PIs and researchers, they're very connected to their work and very private.
Hmm.
So many of those rooms had doors, of course, connected to the lab spaces in the interior of the buildings. But many, even though they had side lights, they would cover some of those side lights to be protective of their work. So if you were like me, a young scientist or aspiring scientist looking into the microscopes and drawing, I was doing scientific illustration. Many times we were inside those spaces and they were lit by incandescent light. We didn't see any daylight. We were not connected to the environment. Incredibly cold spaces. They were not necessarily designed for the humidity, for all of what we had. So I remember some of those spaces, particularly when we were on our first years doing general studies. We experienced the world in sick buildings. We call them sick buildings. Some of them had mold completely growing out of these CMU block painted walls. We don't need insulation. We don't need any of these things. So when buildings were built, they were never built for our climate, for our people. We didn't have vestibules and they were incredibly cold inside. The humidity, the dry air, the heat, our body heat, really created great environments, but not for people. Great environments for bacteria, for mold, and for all of these things. So understanding that my well-being and how I connected to the things that I loved, which at the time were science and genetics, were impacted by the built environment, by the environment that we were in led has left a lasting impression in me. And the desire to create environments where people can thrive and do their best work and be their best selves has never left me. And it was rooted, of course, as I mentioned, in knowing that people that didn't understand climate and culture were designing the buildings that we were spending most of our life with. We know, especially pre-COVID, we spend pretty much more than half of our lives at work, either doing the work or with our colleagues. And if those spaces are not conducive, and we know this now, but if they're not conducive to health and better connectivity, better alignment with ourselves, being able to control our environment, having access to understanding our environment, light, circadian rhythms, if we're not able to connect well with those things, we're never able to be our best selves, to thrive, and to do our best work. So it was, I don't know if to say it was fate or it was just a very linear, now, of course, hindsight 2020, very linear path to recognizing that buildings are how we live and how we exist for me. So, what I would love for people to understand, not unlike my experience in Puerto Rico, which I would rather be at the beach by a pool with the sunlight and the breeze and the smell of the ocean, beautiful mountains. You know, Puerto Rico has the largest rainforest in the United States because of course, we're a territory of the United States. All of these spaces, if our buildings were better connected to understanding our environment, we would live happier lives. I know many people say, I want to live in Puerto Rico. It's like, well, if we design buildings to be better aligned with the climate, maybe we would have the same experience where
Right.
we could be outside and have coffee and chat and work and be better connected to the environment. So for me, it's not necessarily about Puerto Rico, though. I think everybody should go to Puerto Rico. I think everybody should listen to Bad Bunny. I think everybody should fall in love with tropical architecture and modernism. I think being contextual and truly understanding how architecture is defined by its context and by its environment is where I think where architecture should be, which I know is better building for humans. I know you're very much aligned with that. So I definitely recommend everybody going to Puerto Rico. It is incredibly fun. It has beautiful architecture. And if you want to feel like you're rooted in the Caribbean, Puerto Rico, Mexico, St. Lucia, all of these spaces are really fantastic. The Caribbean is beautiful.
very much on my to-do list. All right. So you basically just described the entire reason why I started this podcast in the first place. Thank you. I'm definitely stealing some of those snippets. So let's talk about trade-offs. One of the things I love to do in the shows, I love to talk about trade-offs and the balancing acts, and some of them are pretty consequential these days. For example, energy management versus occupant comfort / occupant health. Right. And let's talk about two of the obvious ones. You mentioned one earlier, natural light. So as we move farther north, right, and you think about maximizing the effectiveness of the building envelope, you would build a dark cave for people. You would put them in a cave because every time you punch a window in there or add a strip of clear story or whatever, you lower the thermal performance of the building envelope, which means you're not managing energy as well as you could. But now you've made it a building that people can actually survive and thrive in, right? And then the other one, and the other big obvious one is the more air you bring into the building, the more air you have to cool in the summertime, or that you'd have to heat in the wintertime. But you've created a healthy building now by bringing more of that air in. What role do you think the AIA can play in bringing some of these sort of discussions to the forefront?
Oh, I think it's absolutely integral in bringing these conversations to the forefront. And actually, the incoming president for 2026, Ilya Azarov, FAIA, his vision and his role for AIA and what he feels AIA needs to become is core to our conversation around regenerative design, around disaster relief, and that the AIA should be the platform that provides the tools for every architect to design for better health. So for me, it means the AIA needs to be an advocate for structural support for all architecture firms. I think one of the most pressing issues today is sustainability and economic pressures, and we see that a lot coming into small firms. So the AIA advocates for tax incentives, accessible grants, contracts that protects architects financially, tools that don't require full-time specialists to manage, policies that reward sustainable choices instead of penalizing them. Decarbonization, it's not a luxury. It should be accessible, achievable, and financially supported. So my commitment to at the AIA, and I know the ethos and the messaging from the incoming president, which in 2027 I'm going to clearly follow, is ensuring climate action is a path and not a barrier. So when I think about energy and occupant health, for me, that's a false tension. Really, a healthy building is a sustainable building, natural light, air quality, acoustics, sensory comfort. These improve both energy performance and human performance. So even though, of course, there can be a perceivable tension, when we think about these problems, it's not really thinking about them, it's not as goals because we think about them in that way. We are creating these silos if we do this. So the problem is not the goals, it's the silos. We've separated energy modeling from human well-being when in reality they both work better together. And AIA absolutely has a role in bringing these conversations together because the future of design is integrated and not divided. And I really think that when we talk about these conversations, we need to talk about them as systems, especially as data and outcomes. So some of the data, yes, it's about energy, it's about how to create better envelope performance and all of these things, but we also need to measure data and outcomes as health systems and how we create better human health. So when I think about that as, architecture as preventive public health, I think about it as a medical planner and I see firsthand how daylight reduces recovery rates, how circulation patterns reduce staff burnout, how acoustic control supports cognitive function, how sensory environments reduce anxiety and pain. And for me, these are just as measurable outcomes as energy building performance, right? The next step in building stronger partnerships would be connecting with public health researchers within the AIA connecting with hospitals and hospital systems, connecting with universities, community health organizations, and to create shared databases that show that the impact of human design on human health is related to how we think of the system in building performance. So I think if we do that and architecture becomes recognized as preventive health strategy and not just a backdrop for health, the AIA becomes integral in the conversation of how we view the built environment and how we create better buildings for humans, which I really love your tagline. You can definitely tell.
Thank you.
But AIA really needs to become, and we talk about this a lot, and we continue to try to strengthen this, an ally in the public health conversation, in the sustainability conversation, and the energy conversation. And I really hope to do that. And I know the incoming president is doing that. And that's right now what I'm thinking about. Who are going to be the public health or the public directors on my board that are going to become those allies that inform us within the AIA how to collaborate better, how to do this better across multiple sectors. Like this really needs to be cross collaboration.
Love it. Yeah. Oh, I absolutely love it. You and I are very well aligned, and we are not alone in that movement of seeing architecture as preventative public health. And the more we have that conversation, the better it's going to be for everybody. I'm working on an article right now, and the most recent data shows 94% of our time, we literally spend 94% of our time inside of buildings. 94. So yeah, we do need to get
Pretty much
this
our
right.
entire lives.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah. North Americans spend very little time outdoors, and apparently it's the same number for Europe. It's even worse in Asia. The number is higher than 94% in China.
Wow.
It really is interesting. So this is something we have to get right. We either have to figure out ways to spend way more time outside, which is a very valid argument as well, or we have to figure out how to make better connections to our natural world and to our community, or our health is going to go the wrong way, right? For the first
Absolutely.
time in a long time, it's going to go the wrong way. So I love hearing you talk about this. Let's talk about green building standards just for a moment. We've had decades of progress with like green globes and well and fit well. Do you see a future where, let's put all of this stuff together, where beauty, performance, sustainability, resilience, human health, where they're all, part of the design discussion, built into the design discussion from the beginning, and they're measures of architectural quality?
That is my ultimate goal and dream. And
Okay.
I hope that is part, or if I ever leave a legacy, I hope that at least it tries to get to that outcome. I truly believe, and that's part of the reason that I really love having grown up in Puerto Rico and having studied at the University of Puerto Rico, is because this is how we define architecture. We defined architecture as what builds or helps build community. And as architects, it is our role to integrate all of these things together. So even though what I'm teaching at Howard University, which I'm very much loving, the idea that I'm helping the next generation of architects think about health architecture, not only as a viable option, but as a way to integrate all of the design standards into an ethos of how they are going to build their practice in architecture around health equity and how that relates to the built environment and all of these things. But the reason I got into psychology and I'm doing a doctorate in psychology is because I want to understand how to better talk about architecture and not, talk architecture and architecting to architects all the time. It's because everybody should have a clear understanding of what architecture is. And as architects, we should be collaborators, facilitators. We are the translators of how people want to live their lives into the built environment. And we need to understand all of these things together. We need to understand architecture, healthcare, education, psychology, which also, I know that this may not be everybody's idea of a great perspective, but I wish more people that loved architecture studied something different for their undergraduate degree and then went into architecture with all of this new input that they could bring into architecture to pave our way to the future of a better integrated system. And I hope that many architects worldwide see the AIA and institutions like the AIA as spaces where they can create that impact, where they can come in with these new ideas, with this worldview that moves us towards better integrating all of these parts and pieces and funneling them through licensure to affect policy, to affect change. So I hope that I can do that as president of AIA, try to build these tools in a progressive, concise, flexible, and most importantly, an adaptive way, a future forward way, where we are advocating for all of these things as part of how we show up in the world, not an afterthought, but as strategic priority, where we're not faced silos, but we are integrating systems. And also, I also think that people that love architecture should go into an architecture degree and then consider how to use design thinking and good design in how they transition into other spaces. I'm actually encouraging some of my students to continue their undergraduate degree in architecture, maybe get their architecture degree and MArch 1, get licensed, and then go into medicine, go into psychology, go into law, go into other spaces where design thinking and good design can make an impact. Clearly, I really love architecture, so
Yeah.
I really push that idea, but I genuinely believe that what we learn as architects is how we should be integrating many of these spaces. And for me, also something that I want to champion within the AIA is citizen architecture, public advocacy, and getting embedded in our governments to change policy, to connect all of these pieces, to talk to people that want to change these policies, that think about housing differently. And together, maybe we can positively affect what is currently happening in the world, where our licensure at times is being challenged, where our professional designation is being challenged, which just happened with the current administration. Now, many professions, including engineering and architecture, are being seen as non-professional, which is actually then limiting grant and loan opportunities for people to pursue these as undergraduate degrees. So when we start to see our profession and many professions that are aligned with what we do in the built environment being challenged, I think we need to step up. And I think that the AIA has a duty and a responsibility to look at the multitude of spaces and cross collaborating and through sectors, how we can connect them together. It's our job to do that anyway, where we have to connect developers, owners, people, clients, different concepts, different building types, different functions. We need to connect it all the time. It's part of what we do. We iterate, we think about these things. I can't imagine better collaborators and better conveners for many other spaces in the world that will affect change in how we create a better earth. Right? The world is here. We hear this all the time. The planet is fine. We're the ones that are causing issues. It'll shift to create a better space with or without us. And we are seeing the consequences of our actions in the built environment. I can't imagine, of course, I heavily challenge. I can't imagine better leaders in that space than architects, and I can't imagine a better institute and a better organization to do that than the architecture and the power that it has to build advocacy and coalitions throughout the world.
Do you need different people to be part of the AIA? Do you need to
Yes.
bring in non-architects in order to start building those bridges?
Oh my gosh. Yes. I think we need both. I think more architects need to reach out
Mhm.
through the AIA and make those connections. We have grants, we have advocates, we have the ArchiPac. We have tools. They're not as expensive and as great as, for example, developers and urban planners and all of these people with a lot of money. So we need them. We need you. We need different people. We need different expertise to come and help us create those tools that are expansive and far reaching, tools that will be able to be used by policymakers, by hospital administrators, by lab designers. We need to work together. And as I mentioned a little before, I'm very much looking forward to finding great public directors to join my board and hopefully help them be interested in convening more of their peers to join our committees, our knowledge communities, but also pull us into their own boards and spaces so that we can better integrate seamlessly. It's a matrix. I think about it like a matrix organization. It cannot be siloed and hierarchical, although they exist for a reason. I think we need to be matrixed horizontally through many of the sectors that make up our businesses, our communities. And I really do hope that we can find greater ways to get our messaging across. And that's why I'm doing this podcast, not only because we align so perfectly, but I'm hopeful that your audience, that it may be a more diverse audience, sees the AIA, sees me and leaders like you and I as opportunities to voice more and reach into those spaces that we may not currently have access to, pull us in, drag us in, or we can pull them up. And those synergies start to encourage the world to see us not only architects, but designers and good design and people that think about the built environment as health into every conversation. In an ideal world, I would love to start talking about architecture through the lens of history, of math, science. The reason I fell in love with genetics is because it's the building blocks of humans. Architecture is the building blocks of the built environment.
Right.
So we need more people. I would love to encourage people to go out of the silos that we create in our professions at times and pull people in. One of the things that I loved most about being on the National Architecture Accreditation Board, the NAB, that regulates our programs that become accredited so that you can get licensed more easily. One of the public directors is a chemist, a biochemist. And when we are having conversations during the board meetings, the connections in our thought process was wildly interesting. And I kept thinking, if we had her in more of our conversations, not just to challenge, but to put things in perspective, how more aligned we are in our desire to create a better world, we would likely create change faster and be future ready and be more resilient as professionals, as people, and as community builders. And she's on my speed dial now. So I'm really trying to figure out who could be great public directors to embolden our board to think critically about what's happening in the world and how to create those connections and those collaborations, but most importantly, how they can be long lasting. So we always encourage people to join the AIA as allied professionals, to come to our conferences, to propose panels, to connect with us and have creative, deviant conversations, which I learned in my psychology degree. Creative deviances are people that challenge the system in a creative way. Of course, deviant because you're challenging the system. But I think we can all do that. And I hope to become one, and I hope to get more creative deviants that see architecture and the built environment as part of how we truly better life, resiliency, and thriving in the world. So if you have connections, if you know of people that would challenge the system a little bit, that are great collaborators, for me personally, selfishly, great storytellers, I'm all in. I'm looking for great keynote speakers that remind us of why we do this, why we have to do this, more importantly, and why we have to do this together. So you tell me, you're great. Maybe we can do something interesting during my conference in 2027 in Philly. We'll
Love.
see.
Manage the connection between building occupants and the outside world using Solera translucent glass. Learn more at advancedglazings.com. Love that. Absolutely love that for sure. Let's talk about the kids for just a minute. We're getting close to the end, Yiselle, but I want to talk about the younger generation, just fairly briefly. You're teaching. Is there anything different? We know the messaging. We talked a
Mm.
lot about the messaging that needs to come across, but the way we deliver the messaging, is there anything different about this generation? You hear they grew up with TikTok, they grew up with Instagram, they grew up with Snapchat,
Yeah.
so they're different. But is there a special way of delivering? Yeah, they're still humans, pretty sure.
They're very much
So,
humans, yes.
is there in fact anything different about the way we have to teach, the way we have to deliver the messages, or is it just, people are people?
Yeah, people are peopling. People will be peopling
Yeah.
all the time. Yes. Generations have differences for a reason. We know we have ideas around, Gen X and Gen Z and millennials and Gen Alpha coming up pretty soon. I can tell you the differences that I see, although also I grew up in Puerto Rico, I went to school in Puerto Rico, so cultural differences
Mhm.
embedded within the conversation. This generation is bold. They're bold, they're present, they're vocal. But what I love, which is also part of what I see culturally aligned now that I'm teaching at Howard with my own experience and my history in Puerto Rico, they're purpose driven. They value transparency, they value justice, they value mental well being, and that at times or historically challenges architectural academia and practice. They are not afraid to challenge the system that doesn't serve them well. They want careers very quickly. Money and economical challenges are very pressing for them. Social challenges are very pressing for them. I think that's definitely part of what is the thing that will or has impacted and defined this generation. A lot of things have, the 2008 in the world, in the United States, predominantly, the recessions, the pandemics, although that's global. But what's happening sociopolitically here, the economical challenges, this generation is significantly less wealthy than the boomers, and the Gen Xers are starting to do better. I know some of these things are about stages in life, and we all go through them, but they want careers that align with their values. And frankly, they're pushing the profession, I think, in the right direction, even though they scare me sometimes because they are procrastinators. They love sound bites. They challenge how things have been taught. They challenge how they want to receive information. They challenge how they view mental health and well being. And I think challenges help us be more resilient and grow in a better direction with many things. Like, for example, when Revit or AutoCAD came into the profession, there's a learning curve. There are challenges and there are learning curves to understand humanity better. And we are talking about human-centered design. So every time a generation is impacted by culture, sociopolitical issues, we have to revisit all of the things that we understand about humanity. So every generation brings something new. Gen Z and Gen Alpha, I think, are bringing an urgency to how we teach, how they learn, and an urgency in how they see themselves as future leaders. And they are very vocal about what that means for them. They're very aware of cultural differences. They're very aware of social differences. I know sexual identity, how their history, how their journey has given them opportunities or how they lack resources. They are, I think, because of information and access to information, I think they're better aware of systems. I don't know if they're better aware of what those systems mean and how to impact those systems really well, but they see systems at play, I feel, in a more visceral way than we ever did because they can see so much information so quickly, not necessarily curated. So, as leaders, as academics, I'm part of ACSA right now, the American College of Schools of Architecture, and I'm seeing now how many of these allied organizations need to collaborate more together. So not only do I see allied professions or even non-allied professions impacting and needing to be part of the AIA, we as allied organizations, the ACSA, the AIA Students Organization, the NAB, NCARB, which is the National Certification of Architects and Registration Boards, and I totally fumbled that acronym, but NCARB and NOMA, we need to constantly work together and understand what's happening through those silos and how those communications need to come together to help support their sense of urgency. We don't necessarily need to, that's with everything, pander to the agency and the urgency. We need to remind them that there are many organizations that are working in tandem. And if they want to make change, how they, throughout the entire career path, they can be leaders in every part of these spaces and have a voice and bring that sense of urgency to the conversation. They can be a students, part of AIAS, part of NOMAS, connect through leadership and have those voices heard within the AIA, within NCARB, and within these larger spaces, so that we also find or recognize their sense of urgency. We all exist in different spaces. Life stages are very different, and we prioritize things seeking balance. Their sense of urgency is very different than our sense of urgency, but two truths can exist simultaneously. So, what I am encouraging and what I'm trying to deliver to my students is, in addition to architecture, or to understand architecture as part of a system, and how the system of architecture and the system of the built environment, the system of politics, the systems of culture, the systems of oppression, the systems of justice, they are all interconnected. And we have to find our place in that conversation. But we need to recognize where their sense of urgency is and educate and teach through that. I told my graduate students that I was somewhat piloting a different way of teaching the graduate seminar. And at the beginning of the semester, I told them, okay, give me the topics that you're most interested in. And they gave me 12 topics. Around many of them had to do with ecological and sustainable practices, sustainability, different topics, urban development, urban justice. And they gave me 12 topics. And I said, okay, now you have to curate a 3-hour session that aligns with learning objectives so that you learn about NCARB and NAB and all of these things and how they impact how we teach. You need to learn how to create learning objectives, how they align with accreditation for your class, and how you're going to teach you and your colleagues or your students, your fellow students, about a particular topic, who you want to listen from, how you're going to embed those fundamentals and those learning objectives viscerally through activities, and how you're then going to become a thought leader as a student in that particular topic. I can tell you that did not go land very well at the beginning. I was scared. I was very scared. They said, we've never been given this much agency. I don't know what to do. How do I curate a panel? I am not an expert. How do I do this? And I said, okay, what you're asking of me is to provide you a set of guidelines. You're asking me to provide you a bit of a framework for you to understand how to curate this session. So I gave them outlines what you should have around 3 weeks, what you should have around 2 weeks, what you should have around 1 week, how we are going to connect through that process. How do you curate a topic through the lens of what you want to learn, but also who you want to learn from? You need to connect with experts. You need to bring them to the table. You need to become a partner to them. How do you curate questions for them? How do you get your classmates to get engaged? And how do you become a teacher and a thought leader? And I said, many of the things that you're learning in architecture are very technical things. You have to pass a test. You have to understand these technical issues. I want to help you understand what we call soft skills, but to me, it's just skills as well. How do you teach? How do you learn? How do you communicate? How do you storytell? How do you network? How do you do all of these things? And how do you do that within academia? So when you leave academia, these things already are part of how you see yourself as an architect. So I'm very excited to see what they come up with for their final project. The final project is sort of a portfolio around who are you going to become in the next 5 to 10 years. And they have to create a very specific vision and strategy of how they're going to align those topics that they told me they loved and they were interested in, those connections that they made when they brought in an expert, what they talked about, and how that was going to be foundational to who they were going to become as architects. And I told them, hopefully, I'll continue to be a partner to them in their growth, and we can revisit that portfolio, that strategy, that manifesto in 5 years, and how that has changed with practice, and how that has changed, or maybe how this manifesto has empowered them to continue in a path that aligns with what they fell in love with, which I can tell you the 12 topics, but they were all around health, sustainability, climate resilience, regenerative design, landscape architecture, justice, the future of academia. And if all, well, I'm hopeful that all my 22, 23, 24 students, if they continue to be in love with that topic and in love with becoming a thought leader in that space and what it takes to truly become a leader, a collaborator, an advocate, the world's going to be a bit better. I'm not going to toot my own horn because that's not a platform, that framework. I didn't create that framework. That was part of Christopher Kelly Leadership Development Program that I was an alumni for in the second year. I want them to be part of that urgency and the solution to that urgency. I don't want them to continue telling the professors, like, you need to teach me, you need to do this. And I don't know how to learn and I don't know how to do these things. There are steps to take. There's a cheat sheet. So I'm going to give you some ideas around the cheat sheet that has helped me. I'm taking them from my doctoral program. And what I've learned, because we just ended the semester, they're just creating their manifesto now, is that they learned more about themselves. They learned more about their peers in having to lead conversations and engage people in those conversations, which I heard from them that they had not had the opportunity to do so before. So I'm excited to see what comes out of that and what my pilot program did. If I failed as a professor and as an advocate, or if maybe this is a good strategy to encourage within academia as well moving forward.
I love it. And you know what? At some point in the future, we should probably do a show just talking about the outcomes from that, because I bet you that'd be a really cool episode, right?
I would love that. Thank you. I'm in.
Yeah, let's do that. Let's do that for sure. Before we go, okay, there's a question I ask Yiselle. I ask every episode, and I ask the same question, and I ask my guests to answer it from whatever perspective you'd like. And here it goes. What makes a great building?
What makes a great building? I think a great building understands people, humans, and what that means. I think it supports their well-being. It reflects their culture. It nurtures their aspirations, and it respects their dignity. I think it feels safe, intuitive, and ideally welcoming. It performs technically, but also emotionally. Great buildings honor the humanity of the people inside them. That's my hope.
Oh, I love that. Great buildings honor the humanity of the people inside them. Magical quote. All right. One last, it is, it's beautiful. One last thing. Do you have any announcements or any like upcoming events? I mean, besides the obvious, as you know, your role with the AIA, do you have anything else that you'd like to share before we end?
Right now, and thank you for the question. Right now, I'm focusing a little bit more in integrating the story that I see about architecture, where architecture is public health, architecture is safety, architecture is economic mobility, architecture is climate resilience, and architecture is dignity. And I want to create a more cohesive ethos to where I want my messaging to come through in the AIA, where we improve air quality, walkability, comfort, all of the things that we've talked about, but also beauty. And beauty, not only as a perceivable outcome, but beauty is not only the measure of impact. And I think I'm trying to do that through YSR and as a platform to build leadership skills, as well as partner with architecture firms. But I think a lot of it, I want to figure out how to get other people to fall in love with architecture, how we can get the AIA to modernize licensure, make better resources, mentorship, how to create that sense of urgency in our curriculums. Like, how do we acknowledge empathy, cultural competency, self awareness, community engagement? How we include all of that into curriculum? How do I do that through the AIA, not only as an academic? And I'm hoping that in the next year, I prepare through Ilya's presidency and through YSR designs greater coalitions within healthcare planning, neuroscience, and intercultural design to shape wellness centered environments. So, right now, I'm seeking partners, I'm seeking thought leaders that will help me create a future ready AIA that is not an end all be all because we can't be that for anybody. We can try to expand our umbrella. And I want a messaging that strengthens not only the AIA and the profession, but also other professions that seek our same outcomes. So I'm going to continue talking about these things, hopefully, continue learning about how other people see architecture. Hopefully, I can start solidifying YSR and get people to want to partner on projects. It can be policy, it can be organizational design, it can be something new and different. Something that's cooking in the works is a strategic organization with some partners called Tinfoil Hat Design Strategies. And I want it to be creatively deviant. I want it to be fun. I want it to be exciting. I want it to be juicy. I want it to challenge the system, hence tinfoil hat. I want it to be a little subversive. I don't know if that will jive very well with current institutions, and I respect that. So, in the works is something fun and new where I'm seeking partners that welcome the opportunity to be creative deviants with me. And I'm slowly building some events and some strategies around that. So I guess I encourage people to connect, to follow me on social media, LinkedIn, Instagram, and hopefully some of those stories will start to reveal themselves and they'll feel compelled to be part of this journey and maybe become a tinfoil hat strategist with me in the future. But that's in the works. Maybe that sounds exciting enough to be a cool thing to promote.
I know I'd want to be part of it. I can't imagine why anybody wouldn't want to be a part of it. It sounds magnificent. Yiselle, thank you so much. What a wonderful conversation. And it's left me hopeful for the future of the AIA and architecture in general. Thank you so much.
Thank you. This has been amazing. I'm incredibly grateful that you saw me and chose me to be part of your journey and the impact that you're wanting to create in the world. I really enjoy, I'm sort of new to your podcast and now I'm obsessed. So
Oh,
I
good.
thank you for this is a journey and you do a lot in putting yourself out there in creating this narrative. And I'm very grateful to now be part of your network and part of your village. And I'm very excited for you to continue to be part of mine. Thank
Thank
you.
you so much. Thank you, and take care.
Likewise. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Better Buildings for Humans. For more information on the world's best light diffusing and highly insulating glass glazing, please visit advancedglazings.com.